All right, today we're gabbing with Shivani Gonzalez, who covers reality TV for the New York Times. And she's written a couple of recent pieces that I really loved and have kind of touched on some bigger ideas around the Bravo and reality TV universe. So I wanted to have her on to discuss some of those topics, discuss the articles. So thanks so much for being here. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. Gabbing about reality TV is my favorite thing to do. So this is a dream come true.
Does your love for reality TV go back really far? Like, what was your sort of entree into the reality world?
Honestly, my first reality TV was The Bachelor in high school. I got really into The Bachelor.
Okay.
And then end of high school, I had a huge Jersey Shore phase. I was obviously late to the party, but I ate it all up. But it wasn't really till like post COVID, like maybe 2021, that I started to really immerse
Oh,
myself in the
really?
Bravo world. So
What was the catalyst for that?
honestly, Below Deck, which I feel like is kind of
Interesting.
not everyone's go-to, but I like love boats. Like I think that world is very interesting. And I was like, you know what? This seems like a good place to start. And then, from there you just get hooked on everything.
Absolutely. So I feel like, I definitely have read your several of your articles, but the one of your recent ones that really popped was obviously this one about fourth wall breaking.
Hmm.
And it's headlined, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives Keeps Pushing Back TV's Fourth Wall. So was this something that you had been thinking about and like was sort of looking for a peg for it? And then obviously season two of Mormon Wives comes along and it like really does kind of shatter that fourth wall to sort of advance the drama on the show. Like, and you were like, okay, perfect. Like, talk to me about how you came to this moment to write this piece.
Actually, it was the other way around. I'd like noticed small moments on different shows, but then I think after, binging the whole season in a couple days, as we all do, I was like, you know what? Like all of the drama this season was about their contracts or issues with
Hmm.
each other. And I feel like you just really don't see that on reality shows. And so I kind of led with that and then looking at, some more examples we've seen, but that was like the first where it really seemed like the central plot point and the central drama circled around stuff that had happened off camera but related to the show. And so that kind of gave me the idea to go with it and see if this was kind of just an idea I'd had or if people were picking up on it. And then, stuff online. I quoted your tweet in my
Hmm.
article because you had mentioned the fourth wall breaking, and I saw a lot of response on TikTok and Reddit of people either being like, we loved this, we thought it was great, or I really hated that they did this. And so I was
Oh,
like, okay,
really?
this is like the people are noticing this, even people who don't like, watch reality TV maybe as aggressively as you and I do. And so I was like, okay, this is like actually like a moment that's happening.
Okay, I want to circle back to sort of the divided response to it because
Mhm.
I'm curious about that. But sort of the sort of subtitle of the piece is reality TV has long advised cast to pretend the cameras and producers weren't there, but for the Mormon influencers of Mom Talk, the business of being on camera is central to the plot. So, do you think like because I think that it's a good thing to remember that like you know all these people are reality stars, but with the Mormon wives specifically, like they are on this show because they were already on camera, obviously in
Mhm.
their own way and kind of by their own volition, and they have complete control over like their TikTok presences. But like that does add a different sort of layer to how they're going to approach being on reality TV.
Definitely. And I think like it's also because I was thinking about this recently. I think that's kind of all they know how to do because that's their life. Like if you think back on a show like Jersey Shore or whatever it is, like reality TV wasn't what it was. And they also weren't getting paid to be reality stars. Like they, got
Right.
some money for being on the show. I think famously not a ton at the beginning. They literally worked for money at, the boardwalk shop or
Hmm.
whatever it may be. And so it's like there was nothing to discuss about the like behind the scenes of the show because there was nothing that much going on. Whereas like this is for the Mormon wives, like their life and what the drama they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis is just about like how much money can I get for this TikTok? What is my contract for the next season? So it makes sense that it was like a necessary shift. And I honestly can't imagine what the drama really would have been this season if they hadn't been allowed to talk
Right.
about
Right. And it's like the first season was it hit so hard because it was this just like totally new raw thing. And like
it.
obviously they had the huge peg with the swinger stuff and Taylor
Hmm.
really kind of carried that sort of them
Yes.
into the zeitgeist. But it. the second season, I mean, I think about like a second season Housewife and how they
Hmm.
respond to the audience reaction to them, how they come back for a second season, and sometimes they've responded in a really good way and they haven't let it impact their authentic selves. But then sometimes it's the complete opposite and they have a terrible second season because they've overcorrected, right? And so I feel
Hmm.
like it was just so smart of them to allow this to happen on a second season with them, because the first question I always had was, okay, they're filming again. How did their newfound, fame beyond TikTok impact them? And we got to see it. And so it was almost like this wish fulfillment too, I think, for some viewers at least.
Totally. And I think that's so smart on the production side of like not to break out of this norm because that is the question and anything other than answering that question would have felt inauthentic, I think.
hmm And I love that you got this guy, Jeff Jenkins, who I
Hmm.
guess directed episodes of Real World and Road Rules, and he's now an executive producer on Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, which is just like, it's so funny because he has seen kind of two very different eras of reality TV, and I'm sure he's done stuff in between then, but in between those two times. But he says, back then there was an approach that you never acknowledge that you're on camera. It was taboo. In fact, I remember people getting fired for it. Can you put into words just sort of what that mentality was and why it was the way it was when reality TV was still in its infancy and up until fairly recently?
Definitely. I mean, my understanding of it, and he was such a great person to talk to because he has just been,
Hmm.
in it. He also was a big producer at the production company that made Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
Got it.
So he was really, which I personally think is like a show that kind of s- like spanned that era in an interesting way because it's like they got Instagram like during its show,
Hmm.
but that's another topic of conversation. But so I think it was like honestly because there was not a lot of faith in viewers. And I think that's what's changed. I think now producers look at viewers as really savvy. They understand what reality TV is like. They understand how much people are getting paid on reality TV and that it's people's entire
Right.
careers. Whereas before, I feel like there was like this necessity, especially because it also wasn't taken seriously. And I mean, still isn't in a lot of ways, which was kind of my whole soapbox. But
Hmm.
it we have to like give people this like well-rounded show without showing anything in the background because they'll just not get it, I think was really what it was. Like we have to sell this to people in a different way than now it's almost the opposite where they have to sell it to us that it's real for
Yeah,
us to believe
totally.
it.
Yes, yes. And before we get to that, like, so you point out Keeping Up, you brought up Keeping Up in the
Hmm.
piece, and how that show there was these several years where it kind of, I think with the rise of social media and sort of, but also with an increased awareness of how this all worked, there was this kind of slight controversy over them reshooting things or how like episodes were sort of spliced together.
Hmm.
Mariah Smith, who's been on this podcast before, she did continuity errors for the cut where she
I loved that. It
kept
was my
track of all
favorite.
that. Yep. And The Hills is obviously another famous example that you bring up where, in the years since even, it's like completely come out that it was pretty much all for the camera and for the show. I mean, Kristen Cavallari recently said in some interview or on Watch What Happens Live actually that like her entire relationship with Brody Jenner towards the end of that show is totally
Hmm.
fake. And he had a full girlfriend outside of the show. So like I feel like those two, The Hills kind of happened and then it fell off a cliff and that was that. And you said Keeping Up sort of went between the different eras, but I feel like that reality had to contend with this idea that it was going to be fake, and
Hmm.
that sort of set them. They were sort of starting for 5 steps behind after those two shows, almost.
Yeah, definitely. As now like almost we have to regain trust and faith with viewers and we have to, yeah, I think go into a new mindset of how we're going to present this because people love drama, people love entertainment, but I don't think people like having the wool pulled over their eyes and I don't think
No,
they like feeling stupid.
no, and I feel like Keeping Up towards the end of its run did a fairly good job at reacting to that. In that, like,
Hmm.
they obviously held stuff back on social media and things, but they also like the show promised behind the scenes of what was
Yeah.
really happening, and it provided that. But also they kept up some of the hijinks that also felt fake. You know what I mean? So I think like
Yeah.
that show again, that could be a whole other episode, like you said. But there's a lot to say there.
Yeah.
But he also says that so now it's kind of evolved into producers impacting stories, kind of on a spectrum from a little bit to a whole lot.
Hmm.
I'm curious what you think about that and sort of when the producer hand kind of shows itself. On Housewives, we've seen producers literally be on camera and intervene, but otherwise, but on Secret Lives, I think about it in terms of like all the anonymous games they play and all that and that kind of stuff. So, what do you think about that idea? Producers in particular.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is a balance and it is a spectrum, I think, depending on the show that you're doing. I think that obviously production is needed to like move the story forward in a lot of ways, but I think it also, producers on reality shows also don't really know what the day is going to hold in a lot of ways. And so I think that that balance of, like you said, like having these things that are very clearly like, the pregnancy roulette, and like I don't think Layla came up with that on her own.
She claimed in
To
my interview with me that with her, I interviewed her and she claimed that it
Okay.
was her idea, but I'm not sure I
Okay.
believe. But
All
I'm not
right,
sure I
Layla.
believe her. I'm not sure I believe her.
Someone provided the pregnancy test. Let's just say that.
Absolutely.
Layla didn't go to CVS, I don't
No.
think. So it's like that makes sense where things have to be driven, and that is what gives fun TV. I mean, the pregnancy roulette is not a great example of that because I think a lot of
Mm-mm.
people didn't find that fun. But I think that like having production's hand in it makes sense. But I think also then where you're going to find that balance is times where they also show how producers are part of this show in a less predictable type of way. Like another example I think about a lot that I don't see people talking about a ton of like breaking the fourth wall in a more serious way was on Below Deck Down Under season 2, where producers basically had to intervene on a potential sexual assault that was happening
Right.
in the cabin. And so it's like that makes sense, A, to show that production is stepping in because it shows that, production is serious and they care about protecting the
Hmm.
people on their
There's a
shows.
morality to it as well. Yeah.
Totally, but also how would they have told that story if they didn't show that producers were involved? Because then a
Mm.
huge key piece would be missing. So I think it's like, I think, and Jeff Jenkins kind of alludes to this in my article, where it's like it kind of is about producers now being on their toes in a different way of like, how can we like involve ourselves in the most authentic ways possible?
Hmm. And then to me though, I mean the intervention time. I mean, I think about like season 5 of The Real Housewives of Potomac, Monique versus Candace. Like there were
Hmm.
all the producers came running in. We've had all these moments like that. But to me, the most thrilling fourth wall breaking comes like on the second season of Mormon Wives when
Hmm.
you're just kind of like all of a sudden like the cast goes to a dinner, everything that we expect out of every episode of every ensemble show
Yep.
ever, and they sit down and they're going to talk about something messy. When you look up and you're like, wait, are they talking about contract negotiations right
Yeah.
now? Or like, when Denise Richards blurts out "Bravo, Bravo, fucking
Hmm.
Bravo," or I mean, even like Portia being able to talk about the fact that she's having an issue with Drew filming with Dennis, like when it sort of just like really organically comes up between the cast members. Summer House, you talk about Jesse telling Lexi, when you watch
Hmm.
this back, you're gonna see that I cared about you. That to me, like it, it's really hard to replicate that feeling.
No, I think I totally agree that I think fans of the show were sitting watching that scene, like being like, oh my God, is this really happening? Do we really get to see this? And I think
Right.
that's where in your tweet you were like, they're really on to something. And I think that's exactly what it is. Like
Hmm.
people were like, oh, we actually get to see this. That's so exciting.
I guess on the flip side, though, do you, is there a limit? Is there a slippery slope on the other side of that? Because, again, your piece is saying that they're continuing to push back that fourth wall. Um, like, do you think there's a limit? Like, how do you think about like where that could potentially go and how that could affect like the landscape of reality TV?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is a limit because there often is, and things often can go too far in every situation. But I'm having trouble figuring out what it would be now because I
Mm,
think that we are just in a different era where people like the viewer is really savvy to contracts. They're really savvy to the fact that people do this as their career. And I think that that's the biggest shift is like, yes, you can have friend drama and you can have whatever, but also like people are on TV. They know they're being perceived on TV. They know that this is their career. So, like, how could you not talk about it? It's not like they're going out to dinner with a friend and then going to their construction site in the morning and they don't have to talk about it. Like, of course, it's going to be a topic of conversation. So, I'm sure there is a limit and I'm sure we'll get to it. But as of right now, I'm all for this like trend of showing more and more.
right, right. And you mentioned, again, if you hadn't shown some of this stuff, the one example I always come back to is Vanderpump Rules and how
Hmm.
Scandival forced them to talk about the platforms they had and being
Hmm.
famous and that kind of thing. But and obviously it was this huge moment for the show, but it was like the last gasp of that show
Hmm.
before it had to be rebooted. And I always just think about like, what if they had allowed the cast to do that 3 years earlier? Like when it really was when they were moving into the nicer places, when their podcasts were hitting a different sort of level, like how would the show's trajectory been different,
Hmm.
And it's obviously a sliding doors moment, but I think that I kind of think of Secret Lives of Mormon Wives like Bravo walked so that could run in
Hmm.
certain ways. Like Bravo really has had to contend with this over
Yeah.
time and figure out and find its footing, and it is. But I don't know if Secret Lives gets there if Bravo hadn't tested the waters.
No, I agree for sure. Because then I think, yeah, you look back at other non-Bravo reality shows where it really was like, and even, The Bachelor is still so produced. Like,
Hmm.
I mentioned an anecdote in there, I think I did, where like Sean Lowe, a former bachelor, said in a podcast, like anytime anyone said the word process, they made them re-record and say journey. Like it's like
Right.
so produced where it's like, yeah, I agree that Bravo and having these moments. And another one I think of too, and well, I was gonna say a reason I think that Summer House continues to be really successful is because they're
Hmm.
kind of maybe the happy medium where it's like these people are obviously reality stars. That's how they make their money. They do have other business ventures, which I think is also why it continues to be refreshing. But like their main money, and like we saw that with the Carl and Lindsay,
Yeah.
breakup of them being like, okay, but we're both influencers. Like that is how Carl's not out here like with $2.50 in his
Right.
bank account. Like he's making money. And with on top of that, I think like the talking of the reunion last season with West and like how his breakup with Sierra had a lot to do with like how he thought he'd be perceived by Bravo or the fact that he knew he was going to have a big female audience and like all of that playing into it. I feel like that's a really good example of the balance of like we're not constantly breaking the fourth wall and we're not constant like I don't really want to hear about the Summer House cast like contracts, but seeing a little bit of like this is their lives and being reality stars is their lives. So how do we translate that into a show?
Right. But like if down the road something would have happened where like, you know, Paige wanted more money than Sierra or whatever,
Right.
and like that became a thing in their friendship, that's when you're like, all right, yeah, we got to talk about this.
We got to talk about
Um,
it.
there's one quote that I want to ask you before we kind of veer into the next topic.
Hmm.
Towards the end of the piece, Jeff Jenkins says, because of the dynamics of the modern world, it's kind of forcing producers to again become very pure documentarians. Can you tell me what he meant by that and sort of elaborate on that?
Yeah, so that kind of came out of our conversation also about the use of social media, which I kind of referenced in talking about like the Kardashians and how like the Instagram literally came out when their show was airing and he told me a really funny anecdote when we were talking about how he walked into Kris Jenner's like famous like tiled black and white floor house and she was like, "Jeff, like have you heard of this thing called Instagram? We have to sign up." And he was like, "No, I just got on Facebook." But I think
Amazing.
that that has allowed these reality stars to also have a lot more ownership over their story and things can't be overly produced because they can just get on social media and directly talk to their fans and be like, that's not what happened. I actually saw an example of it literally 2 days ago where there was an edited clip of the new Love Island spinoff, Beyond the Villa or whatever, that's featuring the
Hmm.
USA season 6 cast. And it was like, it had been edited to make it sound that like Leah basically hadn't said Janae was one of her friends. Um, and she like commented a paragraph on someone's TikTok, like Leah did, being like, I was talking about this specific thing and about how Serena and
Ah,
Cordell live in my building and blah, 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 blah. And I was actually saying, when I said they're like an appendage, I was talking about Kenny and Janae. And so it's like, that was a situation where maybe production edited something for drama and it couldn't stand because Leah was able to be like, no, you're wrong. So I
and maybe
think,
that's a slippery slope. You know what I mean?
right.
Maybe that's where, in some ways, because now they're allowed to address these things and talk about these things openly, in most ways, it almost puts more power into the cast members because
Yeah.
the viewers know that things get spliced and diced, and that's unfair to the people who are watching on TV. And then, even though the stars are told they can't talk about probably editing and blaming editing, like I know that for a fact, like that's something that's like really,
Hmm.
discouraged.
Yes.
Peacock does not want her going on TikTok and saying that my words are taken out of context. You know what I mean? Because then that the blame is on the production and the network. I feel like that is the tension that maybe will always be there.
No, you're so right. I think that is totally the slippery slope because I think also at the end of the day, viewers don't want to be lied to, but they want to enjoy television and they
Yeah.
want to enjoy drama, even if it's slightly manufactured. And I think that getting to that's why reality TV isn't documentary series. Like that's why there is a difference. And so I wonder if, yeah, the slippery slope would be getting too far into documentary where it's like, I still want to be amused. Like I want to still
Yeah.
see
We
silly
have some
fights.
structure, right? We have to
Right.
have it storyboarded. Yeah, exactly. And I feel like, you mentioned The Bachelor and how it's still very produced. And that's going to lead us into this next topic because you also wrote an article about this sort of micro trend of intergenerational dating shows.
Hmm.
But, The Bachelor itself, The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, I feel like its sort of share of the cultural zeitgeist has diminished in recent years. And I would
Hmm.
I would blame it on a couple things. One being that like it just feels like everybody goes on there to try to get brand deals and Instagram followers, and they're not
Hmm.
actually there to like find love, there for the wrong reasons, the famous
Right.
catchphrase. But also, I think that the way that it is so produced is sort of out of sync with what viewers want these days. It's
Hmm.
not raw at all, and I'm curious if you agree with that. If you think that the production sort of holding on to that style of reality TV is that holding it back from the sort of current era?
I mean, I think that's definitely a huge factor, and that's why I think you also see that Bachelor in Paradise tends to be a lot more popular than like I hear so many people anecdotally, and you can also look at like the TV ratings who are like, no, I just watch Paradise, or if I am watching The Bachelor, it's just so I know the people on Paradise because
Mm,
that is so much less formal and less scripted, and like in some ways, if you didn't know, could look like a Bravo show,
right.
because it is more goofy, there's more silly fights, like it's more like messy in terms of like hookups and like all of that stuff. And so I think that like the traditional aspect of The Bachelor and how it's so like, okay, we have date number one and then a group date and then date number two and then a rose ceremony can get boring. And I
Redundant.
think
Yeah.
redundant, yeah, is the perfect word. And but I think another factor of that too, and that'll we can talk about Love Hotel, is I also think that it's not keeping up. I wrote an article last year was like how The Bachelor is shattering its own fantasy. It's also not keeping
Mm,
up with like societal norms of like people getting married at 22. Like people don't really get married at 22 as much anymore, or we as a society are much more comfortable being like, no, it's kind of weird to get engaged to someone that you've had maybe 7 total hours of time with. And I
right.
think that not keeping up with that is like people don't want to see failed relationships over and over. It's like exhausting and
Hmm.
upsetting.
Obviously, I mean, so I am not historically a big Love Island watcher, but I
Okay.
am currently I'm watching this season. I just did a big binge catch up, and I'm
Oh
one
my
episode
gosh.
behind.
Oh, you
But
got a big storm coming. Last night's
oh no,
episode
I
was
saw the I saw
wild.
the storm. I saw the storm of the big
Okay.
America vote. I just watched that this morning. But I'm curious how you think about that show's popularity because it is a lot of people are like 22, 24 on that show, but it doesn't feel like we're like always working up to marriage. Like it feels, and maybe that's why it's okay for them to like fuck with them and so much, like with the production and the voting and
Yeah.
stuff. But that show is extremely popular. Is that just kind of for the same reason that Bachelor in Paradise is popular?
I think so, yeah. I mean, Bachelor in Paradise, they still very much encourage you leaving with an engagement, but it's not like frowned
Yeah.
upon if you don't. And a lot of there has actually been a lot more successful couples that have come out of Bachelor in Paradise, long term. But I think, yeah, with Love Island, it's just not, there's none of this maybe old fashioned, old school, like marital norms put on it. Like nobody's like, no one when they're leaving the villa, if they're coupled up, are like, and so when's the wedding? Like everyone's like,
Right.
okay, no, now they have to go out in the real world and date. And I think what's fun about Love Island is it actually plays more into what societal norms are, which is dating a lot of people at the same time, making out just to make out, not to find your husband or wife. Like I think that is a lot more relatable to what is the median reality TV viewer age, which is like particularly women, but also men, but like in their
Hmm.
20s and 30s. And so I think
Yeah.
it's just like it feels a lot more comfortable, maybe is the word. Like you're just like, yeah, this makes sense. Like I would also go on a really good date and then like kiss a stupid guy I know I shouldn't have kissed. Like
Right.
that's
Right.
more relatable
Totally.
than being like let's get married in a week and a half.
And I also think that it, again, this is my first real experience watching a full season of Love
Hmm.
Island, and like it plays into what we just talked about in terms of like just the it's actually not highly produced because they can't do that when it's
Hmm.
airing essentially in real time. Like
Yeah.
we're having rawer conversations and sort of it just feels like we're even though it's being fucked with like with these different like stunts and stuff, but like it's not planned out, which I think is really refreshing. But let's talk about sort of this again, this micro trend of intergenerational dating shows. Obviously, we'll get to Love Hotel, but when it comes to the Bachelor verse, I think the first big instance of this was Golden Bachelor and Golden Bachelorette. And
Hmm.
again, I had dropped out of Bachelor Nation. Like I was
Fair.
over it. Like I was not into it anymore. I went through, probably like 7 years where I was like really down. But
Hmm.
I tapped back in for the Golden Bachelor and I was like, yeah, the show is still highly produced and it's still formulaic in that way. But to me, what I liked about it was how because we were talking with older people who have gone through real shit in their lives and
Hmm.
they also really had nothing to lose. Like there was this authenticity that was able to break through that sort of artifice of the production that I just found like wasn't being shown anywhere else on TV.
Hmm.
And I'm curious what you think about why the golden spin-offs were able to sort of break through in the zeitgeist in a way that The Bachelor, the classic kind of primary shows have not been able to in a while.
I think a big reason is kind of what I touched on before, where it's like relatability. I think that again, like it's becoming less and less relatable for people at 22 to be like looking for a really serious relationship and getting married, whereas it is very relatable. We're now getting to a point where like, probably our parents' generation is like the generation where the divorce rate is over 50%. So you're seeing these
Yeah.
people who are in their 60s and 70s looking for a second love or second marriage or third or fourth or fifth or whatever it may be. And I think that that feels relatable and authentic, and that's why people are able to buy in. And then I think honestly there was a lot of disappointment and it kind of went downhill again when it was like, okay, these relationships also aren't working out, and so it's like, okay, then what's the point? But I think the excitement over it and the initial draw was like, okay, yeah, this is actually refreshing and actually relatable, and it's actually someone you want to root for love. They hopefully don't care about Instagram followers, they don't care, about how they're perceived as much. And then, that seemed to maybe not be as
Right.
true. But like that was, I think that's why people got excited about it.
Yeah, for sure. And then, so I wasn't aware of this, but you called out the fact that this upcoming season of Bachelor in Paradise is going to feature, as it usually does, people from The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, but it's also going to feature people from Golden Bachelor and Golden Bachelorette. Are they going to be mixed in together? I think I saw today or yesterday they announced some of the cast, but what do you know about this?
They have not given me a comment. I've asked many a time if it's going to be mixed. It seems like they're trying to, it honestly seems like they're also trying to see just what the vibes are. I know it
Sure.
just finished filming recently, so someone definitely knows, but it seems like they're really rooting for intergenerational dating, which I didn't really expect, but Wes, sorry. Wells Adams, sorry,
Mhm,
Wells, who is like the bartender on it, has like
mhm.
really rooted for that publicly. And Jesse Palmer, the host, recently went on a podcast and was like, "Don't we all want to see Bill Belichick's relationship?" Which was an interesting reference. But
Huh.
so
I
he
think I
like,
missed that news cycle. That's
oh yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Okay.
But so I think that was really them rooting for that. So it seems like there might be that thing, and I think that's going to be really interesting into America's perspective because I think that I can make a generalization that maybe no one is super interested in seeing an older man pursue a way younger woman, but it could be kind of fun to see a younger man pursue an older woman. So
Very,
it'll be
very much
really
so.
interesting to see how
And
that
I think
plays
that
out.
I think that sort of helps to somewhat explain the Love Hotel,
Hmm.
the refreshing nature that the kind of the refreshing energy that brought into the Bravo verse. I think like I
Hmm.
thoroughly enjoyed its 8 episode run. Like
Hmm.
I could totally see this formula working. Just put four more people in there. I could see it being men with women. I could see them taking four male Bravo stars, but I think
Yeah.
I'd prefer four housewives put in there.
Hmm.
And I think they chose four great women to kick it off. Like
Yes.
even though Shannon keeps to her age group it seems, and that's not something she does. Like Luann, we know can go kind of
Loves. Yeah.
can run the gamut, right? Ashley is sort of the flip side of that. She's the
Yeah.
younger woman who goes for an older man, and Giselle. we honestly didn't know that much about her dating life, but she had been most recently connected to a summer house person in Jason. So, talk to me about what you think Love Hotel really brought to the Bravo sphere and how it sort of played into this, again, micro trend that we're talking about.
Totally. I mean, I think it almost played off of the what people were excited about for the Golden Bachelor, but maybe followed through in it in a way that was more enjoyable to watch. Like I think it's that same thing of like, and I talked to Luann and Giselle for the article, but I had a lengthy lunch with Luann, and so
Oh
we
my
talked a
God,
lot
so
about
how
this.
fun.
The most fun. I love my job. But we talked a lot about how it's like this is the norm. You're seeing older people date, you're seeing older people who have either been previously married, have kids from past relationships being like, okay, I want to get out there. But I think the difference between Golden Bachelor and Love Hotel is that Love Hotel was very open to it being like, yeah, just date, like just see, like you don't need to. I think again with The Bachelor, it's so much more a little old school in its vibes where it's like, okay, so now get engaged.
It's
Whereas like
structured. Yeah.
Love Hotel was like, why don't you just mingle with some guys and see who you like? See if you want to see what it's like to date a younger guy. See if you want to date an older guy. See if you want to date a guy from Hawaii. See, like it was much more open and probably realistic to what dating at that age is actually like because there's also less of a need for commitment because
Hmm.
if you want kids, you've probably already had them, so you don't need to worry about that aspect. And you have the time, money, and energy to be dating multiple people and, travel around to date people. So I think that it really hit on that. I was just watching Luann on Watch What Happens Live on Sunday night. And like she's like, I have this necklace from James who was on the show, but I have this huge ring I'm wearing on my ring finger from one of my other lovers. And I'm like, and as you
Good for
should be
you. Yeah,
doing.
you go,
And
Glen
that's
Coco.
exactly what it should be. And I think that it's probably refreshing for people our age to see it, but I assume it's also really nice for people who are, there's plenty of older women who are Bravo fans to be like,
Totally.
yeah, it is
Yeah.
okay if I want to go out and make out with a guy. Like,
A
why
thousand
not?
percent. Yeah, they are being completely empowered in
Yes.
whatever sort of direction they want to go in. Like Shannon seems like somebody who'd want to go the more very much the traditional route. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And like, Luana again was just like the perfect person to have on this.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she's the one that ends up with like the most promising
A love
connection.
affair. Yeah.
Totally. But I feel like one of the tensions for me in some of these shows is that, I mean, one of the reasons why Love is Blind actually can really work and has produced some couples that have lasted is the geographic factor, and like they're all
Yes.
from the same city. And I feel like on the Golden Bachelor and Bachelorette, I felt that tension again, where like it was
Mm-hmm.
like I feel like who was it? Was it Jerry, the first guy, or was it Joan? I forget which couple it showed itself in, but one of them like the where they lived was like a huge factor in like who
Yeah.
they were choosing. And I just love that like that wasn't really like that's such a boring factor to talk about on TV,
Yeah.
honestly. So it's like for that to like not really be a huge issue on Love Hotel, I think was also like great. And of course, like Luanna's Mrs. Worldwide, she's always touring, she's always doing
Yes.
her cabaret in a different country. Like
Mm-hmm.
that works perfectly for her, you know?
No, absolutely. And I think that is representative of probably a large group of women of a certain means who are like, yeah, I don't need to live in the same place as you because we're not having kids. We don't need to worry about that like physical or like locational commitment. So it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, let's date, let's see. And if it ends up being someone who is in the same place and is long term on a potential future season of Love Hotel, that's also great. But like it doesn't need to be that structured, I think is the
Hmm.
big point.
When you think about the future of Love Hotel and like a potential second, third, fourth season of the show, like what would excite you to see? Like, would you want it to see like again more housewives plugged into that, or would you want it to be mixed up? Because I guess you could theoretically also have like some Summer House or Vanderpump Rules people on there, or I don't know. What
Yeah.
what would you?
I mean, I hate to admit I fell for a fake tweet Bravo headline and it was like, how they did that shoot. I think it was recently in People where it was like
Yes,
Bravo's most
the
eligible men.
singles.
Like I like throw Carl in there. I want Carl to find love. I want him to throw, Shep would be interesting. Like I kind of feel the opposite of you, whereas like I'm like I want to see some like Bravo men who have maybe floundered in their past relationships go and like really see who they like aside from just like their fellow castmates.
Yeah, yeah, you have to open it. Sometimes it feels like their worlds just aren't opened up, and so maybe they need people to
Yeah.
push them in that direction.
Yeah. And like have them
Yeah,
just be with like I loved the one guy, I forget, maybe it was Earl on Love Hotel who was like, who's Andy Cohen? Like get
Earl the
those
Pearl.
types of yeah,
Yeah,
get
totally.
those types of people in there, but like for the men, I think could be fun. And then of course, like more housewives would be wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's actually it'd be difficult to find younger women who
Yes.
don't know who what Real Housewives is or what Bravo is, and it's probably even difficult to find women of a certain age too
Yeah.
who are the same way the men really were not clocked into like it felt like some of their daughters and sons had signed them up for this and they just were kind of
Yes.
like go for it, you know.
Totally.
So that was something again, sort of like this perfect magic of a first season of a show like
Yeah.
this. um but yeah, I'm so glad that Bravo's dipping their toe into this trend because it's to me this show felt like obviously Golden Bachelorette vibes, but also had a little White Lotus in it. It had a little
Yeah.
Love Island, Bachelor in Paradise in it. It was a
Yes.
nice kind of amalgamation of different things that we've already seen. You
Yeah,
know,
and it felt like a good mix of picking out the best things of all those things and putting them into a show.
totally,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, Shivani, I loved getting to pick your brain about some of these articles that you've written. Again, really great writing.
Thank
I
you.
love finding writers who are working at these big outlets who are giving reality TV the spotlight it deserves and unpacking it because that's what so many of us want that. We want it to be treated seriously and like the scholarly topic that it can be, clearly,
Yes.
you
No, I
know?
mean, yeah, I think I always say it's a huge reflection of what's going on in society, and it's also the most accessible form of television. So
Absolutely.
I'm big
Absolutely.
on covering it.
So where can people find more of your writing, follow you, plug all the things before we sign off here?
Yes, so I write for the New York Times exclusively. So my name is Shivani Gonzalez. I have a little byline page if you want to check it out. I also write a weekly TV column, which is just a roundup of everything that's on TV that
So
week.
good. I love those.
Reality, thank you. Reality and non-reality. I try to do like a good mix, but I think that's always fun and can be a good way for me to cover reality TV, even if we're not doing a long feature. I'm kind of active on Twitter under Shivani Gonzalez, but those are the big ones.
Got it. Got it. Well, Shivani, I really appreciate this, and we'll have to have you back soon next time you write
I
a
would
great
love that.
piece.
Anytime,
Yeah,
like I said, I could gab forever. So I
I
appreciate
love
you
it.
taking the time
Thank
to
you
chat
so
with me.
much.
Have a great day.
I want to gab.